The merciless August sun beat down on the metal roof of the Cedar County livestock auction, turning the barn's interior into a furnace. Juno Morgan wiped sweat from her forehead as she squeezed between farmers and traders, all moving in a synchronized ballet of nods and numbers. The familiar smell of hay and leather mingled with the odor of sweat and anticipation. At 15, Juno knew this environment well, but today she was here with a different purpose. "And now we have this one," announced Marshall the auctioneer, pointing to the center of the ring. An uncomfortable silence fell over the venue. In the center of the circular space stood a golden Labrador, more skeletal than any farm dog should be. Visible scars crossed his dull coat, and his eyes, a faded amber, fixed on some invisible point on the floor in front of him. There was no collar around his neck, just a rough rope tied makeshift style. "This one's no good anymore," muttered a man in a dirty cap near Juno, crossing his arms. "Too damaged. Nobody's gonna want him." Marshall sighed, already knowing the animal's fate if nobody placed a bid. Opening bid, $20. The silence that followed was cut only by a few muffled laughs. Nobody raised their hand. Juno felt the weight of the small wad of crumpled bills in her pocket, savings from months of working in the stables at Willow Creek Farm and helping neighbors with household chores. "I'll take him." Her voice, firmer than she expected, cut through the murmurs. All heads turned in her direction. Small for her age, wearing a worn jacket and dirt-encrusted boots, she held their gaze with determination. "You sure about that?" asked Marshall, raising an eyebrow. "That dog ain't worth nothing, girl," scoffed Whalen, a tall farmer with broad shoulders. "He'll just bring you trouble." Juno ignored the comment and nodded, pulling the crumpled bills from her pocket, money she'd been saving to upgrade her riding equipment. When Marshall brought down the gavel, sealing the sale, the Labrador didn't react. He didn't even raise his head. Juno stepped forward to the center of the ring, gently taking the end of the rope. "Let's go home, buddy." The dog didn't move, as if he'd turned to stone. Marshall had to push him slightly, almost with pity, to get him to take his first reluctant steps. Outside, the air was no less suffocating. Juno led the Labrador to the old pickup truck, where her grandfather, Chester Morgan, waited patiently. "So this is our new friend?" asked the gray-haired man with a sun-weathered face, observing the dog with a mixture of concern and curiosity. "He just needs a chance, Grandpa," Juno replied, helping the dog climb into the back of the truck, noticing how he shuddered at her touch. The journey to Willow Creek was made in silence. Through the rearview mirror, Juno observed the Labrador, who remained exactly where they had placed him, as if fearing that any movement might result in punishment. When they arrived at the farm, Aunt Martha was waiting on the porch, her face hardened by years of work, softening at the sight of the animal's condition. "My God, what did they do to this poor soul?" she murmured, approaching cautiously. "He's going to need someone who won't give up on him," Chester commented, exchanging a meaningful look with his daughter. Martha nodded, recognizing both the determination and the pain in her niece's eyes. Since the accident that had left Juno with one permanently weaker leg than the other, the girl had been struggling to find her place in the world. Perhaps, Martha thought, this broken dog was exactly what her niece needed. "I'm going to call him Roscoe," Juno decided, as she guided the reluctant dog toward the barn. "And why that name?" Chester asked, curious. "It was my dad's dog's name," she answered, avoiding her grandfather's gaze. "He told me stories about him, how they were inseparable." Chester and Martha exchanged concerned looks. Juno's parents had been traveling for work for almost a year, building bridges in distant countries, their absences filled only by postcards and rare phone calls. The longing was a burden the teenager carried silently. In the barn, Juno prepared a comfortable space for Roscoe, placing old blankets in a protected corner. The Labrador, however, didn't approach. He kept his distance, watching the girl's every move with vigilant eyes. "It's okay," Juno spoke softly, placing a bowl of food and fresh water on the ground. "You're safe now." When she left the barn, leaving the door slightly ajar, she paused for a moment, watching the sunset painting the sky in orange hues. She felt the familiar weight of loneliness, but also a new responsibility that gave her purpose. On the horizon, heavy clouds announced an approaching storm. Inside the barn, alone in the shadows, Roscoe remained motionless, his eyes reflecting the same dark clouds that were approaching. For the first 2 weeks, Roscoe refused to eat when Juno was around. The food she left only disappeared during the night, when everyone was asleep. He kept his distance from everyone, seeking refuge in the darkest corners of the barn when anyone approached. "Give him time," advised Dr. Bennett, the local veterinarian who came to examine him. He's suffered severe trauma. Recovery, if it comes, won't be quick. The discouraging news didn't diminish Juno's determination. Every morning before school, she went to the barn and sat at a respectful distance from Roscoe. "Today I'm going to help Grandpa fix the north fence," she would say as if talking to a friend. "Then I have a math test. I'm not very good at it, but I'm studying." Roscoe never responded, obviously, but Juno noticed small changes. Sometimes he would watch her as she spoke, other times his ears would move, attentive to the sound of her voice. On a particularly cold morning, when autumn was already announcing its arrival with golden leaves falling from the trees, Juno arrived at the barn to find the space empty. Her heart raced. A quick inspection revealed a hole dug under the back door. "Roscoe's gone!" she shouted, running toward the main house. The search began immediately. Chester took the pickup to check the nearby roads, while Martha called the neighbors. Juno, ignoring the pain shooting through her weaker leg, explored the fields on foot, calling the Labrador's name. It was near Silverbrook Creek, at the property's edge, that she found him. Roscoe was standing on the bank, looking at the running water, as if contemplating following its flow far away from there. Juno stopped a few yards away, her heart beating fast from the effort of the walk. She knew that if she ran or shouted, he might run away. Instead, she sat quietly on the damp grass and began to hum a soft song that her mother used to sing to her as a child. For almost an hour they remained like this, Juno humming, Roscoe motionless at the creek's edge. Eventually, he turned and faced her. His eyes, once dull, now contained a spark of something. Curiosity, perhaps. Recognition. Slowly, Roscoe took a step in her direction, then another. When he was just a few feet away, he stopped again, as if an invisible barrier prevented him from continuing. "It's okay," Juno spoke softly, extending her hand. "I know what it's like to feel afraid too." It was as if an invisible connection formed between them in that moment. Not that Roscoe had magically overcome his trauma, or that he fully trusted her, but there was a mutual recognition of pain, a silent understanding. The next day, a stranger appeared at Willow Creek Farm. He introduced himself as Harris, a middle-aged man with thin-framed glasses and a serious expression. "I heard you bought a Labrador at the auction," he said, holding his hat in his hands. "I work with service dogs, and I might know what happened to him." Juno invited him in, feeling a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. In the kitchen, as Martha served coffee, Harris revealed the truth. "His registered name is Apollo," he explained. "He was trained to be an assistance dog for people with reduced mobility, but was discarded after an incident. The official report simply stated, unsuitable for service. But Harris, who worked at the same organization, told a different story. He was punished for protecting a child during a training exercise," he revealed. His words carrying contained indignation. His superiors called it disobedience, since he ignored a direct command. As a result, he was severely reprimanded. Harris didn't go into details about the nature of the punishments, but his somber face said enough. "Some trainers believe breaking a dog's spirit is necessary for total obedience," he concluded bitterly. "I disagree. I came here because I wanted to know what had happened to him." Juno felt tears burning her eyes, but she held them back. Anger and determination mixed in her chest. "He's not Apollo anymore," she declared firmly. "He's Roscoe now, and I'll prove that he's not a failure." Harris observed the teenager with renewed respect. "If anyone can help him recover, it seems like it's you," he said, rising to leave. "I'd like to follow his progress, if you'll allow me." That night, sitting in the barn beside Roscoe, who now allowed her presence, though still keeping his distance, Juno reflected on what she had learned. "Jack, you're not flawed," she whispered to the Labrador, who watched her attentively. "You were loyal and brave, and someone punished you for it." The wind blew hard outside, making the barn structure creak. Roscoe, for the first time, moved a few inches in her direction. "I know how it is too," she continued, unconsciously touching her weaker leg. "When people look and only see what's broken in you." It was in that moment, under the faint light of an old lantern, that Juno felt the first touch. Roscoe's muzzle, gently pressed against her hand for a brief second before retreating. A beginning. Progress with Roscoe was slow but steady. He began accepting food directly from Juno's hand, though he still moved away to eat it. He learned to sleep inside the barn, even if he kept his eyes open for much of the night. Gradually, he allowed Juno's presence for increasingly longer periods. At school, the situation was different. Juno had always been a quiet student, keeping to the margins since the accident that had left her with a permanent slight limp. Years of cruel comments and pitying looks had built a protective barrier around her, "So the weirdo got herself a weird dog," taunted Amber Collins, the unofficial leader of the popular group, when Juno mentioned Roscoe to her only friend Ellie during lunch. Perfect match. Juno felt her face burn but remained silent. Defending herself would only make things worse. She had learned that the hard way. Ellie, however, didn't share this philosophy. "At least she has a heart, Amber," she retorted, facing the popular girl. "Something you clearly don't have." The confrontation resulted in a week of detention for Ellie for disrespectful language. Juno felt guilty about her friend's punishment, but also touched by her loyalty. "You didn't have to do that," she told Ellie as they walked home. "Of course I did," her friend replied firmly. "I'm tired of how they treat you. And frankly, I think what you're doing with that dog is amazing." That night, while caring for Roscoe, Juno reflected on her friend's courage. What would it be like to feel so secure, so ready to face injustice? She herself had always hidden, accepting the victim role imposed on her. "I think we have more in common than I thought," she murmured to Roscoe, who watched her with attentive eyes. "Shall we've both learned to make ourselves invisible?" Days later, something unexpected happened. While checking the fences in the south field, a task she performed meticulously despite the difficulty imposed by her weaker leg, Juno tripped in a hole hidden by tall vegetation. She fell heavily, feeling a searing pain in her ankle. "Damn it!" she exclaimed, trying unsuccessfully to get up. To her surprise, Roscoe, who had been following her at a distance as he had recently started doing, ran to her. He didn't run away, as he would have done weeks before. Instead, he positioned himself by her side, watching her attentively, as if assessing the situation. "I'm okay, boy," she said, though the tears in her eyes belied her words. Roscoe stayed by her side as she repeatedly tried, without success, to stand up. When it became clear that Juno wouldn't be able to walk back to the farm, the Labrador did something surprising. He positioned himself so that she could use his body as support. With Roscoe's help, Juno managed to balance herself and slowly limp back home. The journey was long and painful, but with each step she felt the dog's firm presence beside her, adjusting to offer the necessary support. "Look at you two," Chester commented with an emotional smile when they finally reached the yard. Already forming a team, the news about Roscoe helping Juno spread quickly through the small community. Harris, keeping his promise to follow the dog's progress, visited regularly, always impressed with the changes. "He's showing natural assistance behaviors," he observed during one of his visits. "It's extraordinary, considering his history." Juno, however, realized there was still a long way to go. Roscoe still had episodes of extreme fear. Certain sounds, particularly raised male voices, made him tremble uncontrollably. He still recoiled when anyone other than Juno tried to touch him. The real turning point came when Oak Ridge High School organized a charity event for abandoned dogs. Ellie, part of the organizing committee, insisted that Juno participate. "You can show how even the most difficult cases have hope," she argued. "Besides, it'll be good for both of you to socialize more." The idea of exposing Roscoe to a noisy environment full of strangers seemed risky, but Juno also recognized the truth in her friend's words. Isolation wasn't the answer for either of them. On the day of the event, Juno was nervous enough for both of them. Roscoe, surprisingly, seemed calm beside her, though his vigilant eyes never stopped scanning the environment. What happened next shocked everyone. A balloon popped near them, the kind of sound that would normally send Roscoe into a state of panic. Instead of running away, however, he turned to Juno, observing her reaction before calming himself. A small child approached hesitantly, and Roscoe, as if understanding her fear, lay down to appear less intimidating. "He's reading situations and responding appropriately," Harris commented, observing closely. "He's recovering not just his confidence, but also his natural abilities." Roscoe's transformation didn't go unnoticed. People began to approach, curious about the miracle dog who had overcome a traumatic past. Juno, normally shy in crowds, found herself telling Roscoe's story with a confidence she didn't know she possessed. "It's official," declared Ellie at the end of the day as they helped dismantle the booths. "You two are changing together." Juno reflected on these words as they walked home, Roscoe trotting comfortably by her side. It was true. The dog wasn't the only one transforming in this journey. The success of the charity event brought unexpected attention to Juno and Roscoe. The local newspaper published a small report about the Labrador's inspiring recovery, and Harris spoke enthusiastically about using the story as an example in his work with other service dog trainers. "You've proven that methods based on fear and punishment are not the way," he said during one of his regular visits. In fact, we're planning a rehabilitation program for discarded service dogs, and we'd like Roscoe to be our first official success case. The proposal was tempting. It would mean Roscoe would receive professional training, regain a purpose as an assistance dog, and help change the life of someone in need. He would have to stay at the training center for at least 3 months, Harris explained. Afterward, he would be assigned to a person compatible with his temperament and abilities. Juno felt her heart sink. 3 months without Roscoe, and then he would belong to someone else. "I need to think about it," she replied, feeling her throat tighten. That night, lying in bed, Juno stared at the ceiling, silent tears running down her temples. The idea of separating from Roscoe was too painful to contemplate. He wasn't just a rehabilitation project or a good deed. He had become her best friend, her silent confidant, the first creature in a long time who truly saw her as she was. At the same time, a persistent voice in her mind questioned whether it would be fair to keep Roscoe merely as a pet when he could help someone who really needed daily assistance. "What should I do?" she whispered to the darkness. The answer came from an unexpected source. The next morning during breakfast, Aunt Martha placed a letter in front of Juno. "It arrived yesterday," she said softly. "From your parents." Juno picked up the envelope with trembling hands. Communications from her parents were rare and precious. Inside, besides the usual letter describing their adventures, building infrastructure in remote places, there was surprising news. "We've been thinking a lot about you, dear. We know it's not easy being separated from us for so long, especially after everything you've been through. We've finally secured a project closer to home. We'll be back in 2 months, and this time, we'll stay for a good while. We can't wait to hug you again." 2 months. Her parents would be returning after more than a year away. Joy and relief flooded her chest, but were soon replaced by a new dilemma. If she accepted Harris's proposal, Roscoe would be gone when her parents arrived. "I don't know what to do," she confessed to Ellie during lunch at school. "On one hand, I feel like I'd be selfish keeping him just for myself. On the other, the idea of giving him up breaks my heart." Ellie considered her friend's words carefully. "I think the question you need to ask is, what would be best for Roscoe? Not for you, not for possible people he could help, but for him." The question resonated in Juno's mind all day. What would be best for Roscoe? When she returned home, she found the Labrador patiently waiting at the gate, as he had recently started doing. His eyes, once dull and distant, now brightened when he saw her. His posture, once curved and defensive, was now confident and relaxed. "Hello, boy," she greeted, stroking his ears, a gesture that would have made the dog cringe in fear before. Juno spent the afternoon observing Roscoe as she performed her farm chores. She saw how perfectly adapted he was to the routine of the place, how he had formed connections not only with her, but also with Chester, who was now allowed to pet him briefly, and even with the chickens, which he watched curiously without ever chasing them. This was Roscoe's home. Here he had healed, had found safety. Separating him now, sending him to a strange environment with unknown people. Would that be fair? Her decision was solidified when, during dinner, the phone rang. It was Harris. "I have fantastic news," he announced enthusiastically. "I spoke with the board and they're willing to do a special program. Instead of sending Roscoe to the center, we could train you as a handler. You two would stay together and still provide valuable services to the community." The proposal was perfect. Roscoe would keep his home and his person of trust, while still fulfilling a meaningful purpose. "Yes," Juno exclaimed, feeling an enormous weight lifted from her shoulders. Yes, that would be wonderful. When she hung up the phone, she ran outside to share the news with Roscoe. The Labrador, sensing her joy, jumped and barked, rare behavior that demonstrated how much he had evolved. It was at that exact moment, with the sun setting on the horizon and the fresh autumn air enveloping the farm, that Juno realized how much she had changed too. The shy and insecure girl who hid from difficulties was now making brave decisions. The teenager who once defined herself by her limitations now saw possibilities. Roscoe wasn't the only one finding a new purpose. The following weeks were intense for Juno and Roscoe. The specialized training demanded dedication from both. Harris came 3 times a week, bringing equipment and knowledge to transform the recovered Labrador into a true assistance dog. Juno learned specific commands, handling techniques, and how to identify subtle signals that Roscoe emitted. The Labrador, in turn, expanded his repertoire of skills, retrieving objects, opening doors, offering support for balance, and even responding to simulated emergencies. "He has natural talents," Harris observed after a particularly successful session. It's as if he's finally found his calling. News of Roscoe's transformation spread throughout the community, inspiring others to consider adopting rescued dogs. Even Amber Collins, the girl who used to taunt Juno, showed up at the farm one day, timidly asking if she could meet the cool miracle dog everyone was talking about. At home, the date of Juno's parents' return was approaching. The guest room was transformed back into a space for the couple, and Martha spent hours organizing details for a warm reception. "They'll love Roscoe," Chester commented as he adjusted a burned-out lamp on the porch. "And they'll be proud to see how much you've grown, dear." The prospect of reuniting with her parents after so long filled Juno with a mixture of conflicting emotions: joy, anxiety, and even a pang of resentment for the long period of absence. What would it be like to introduce them to the person she had become? Amid these reflections, an unexpected challenge arose. During a training session in the town park, a group of children approached, fascinated by Roscoe. One of them, a boy of about 8, ran excitedly before his parents could contain him. The sudden movement and the child's high energy triggered something in Roscoe. In an instant, the confident and calm Labrador transformed back into the frightened dog from the auction. He backed away, visibly trembling, his hair standing on end, a low growl escaping his throat. "Roscoe, no!" Juno commanded, trying to control the situation. The boy stopped, confused and a little scared. His parents quickly pulled him back, looking disapprovingly at the dog. "I thought this dog was trained," the father commented acidly. Juno felt her face burn with shame and concern. She crouched beside Roscoe, speaking calmly until he calmed down, the trembling gradually diminishing. When the family walked away, Harris, who had been watching from a distance, approached with a serious expression. "That's a problem," he said frankly. "An assistant's dog can't react like that, no matter how scared he is." "It was just a setback," Juno argued defensively. "He was progressing so well, and he still is," Harris assured. "But we need to work on this specific trigger. Energetic children clearly take him back to the original trauma." The incident left a mark on Juno. What if Roscoe never completely overcame his past? What if, despite all the progress, he remained fundamentally broken? Harris, noticing her discouragement, placed a hand on her shoulder. "Every service dog faces challenges in training. It doesn't mean Roscoe has failed, just that we've found an obstacle we need to work on." In the following weeks, they dedicated themselves to careful desensitization. Gradually, they exposed Roscoe to children, first at a distance, then closer, always in controlled environments. They used positive reinforcement, patience, and lots of treats. Progress was frustratingly slow. Some days, Roscoe seemed completely comfortable around the volunteer children who helped with the training. Other days, a sudden movement or a high-pitched laugh would trigger his defensive response. "And maybe he's just not cut out for this," Juno confessed to Harris one rainy afternoon after a particularly difficult session. "Maybe I'm pushing him too hard." Harris considered her words thoughtfully before responding. "Service work isn't for every dog, that's true," he admitted. "But I still believe in Roscoe, and more importantly, I believe in your partnership. Together you can overcome this challenge." The ultimate test came unexpectedly. During a community fair where Juno and Roscoe were demonstrating basic assistance skills, a small commotion broke out at a nearby booth. A little girl had gotten separated from her parents and was crying inconsolably, surrounded by strangers trying to help. Roscoe's ears perked up at the sound of the child's cries. Before Juno could react, he was pulling in the girl's direction, his behavior focused and purposeful, not fearful or aggressive. "Roscoe, wait!" Juno called, but the Labrador was determined. To everyone's amazement, Roscoe approached the crying child with gentle, measured movements. Instead of showing fear or nervousness, he lay down beside her, his head resting gently against her small hand. The effect was immediate. The girl's sobs subsided as she looked at the dog with wide, curious eyes. "Look at that," whispered an observer. "It's like he knows exactly what she needs." By the time the girl's frantic parents arrived, she was calmly petting Roscoe, her tears forgotten. The Labrador remained steady, his eyes occasionally seeking Juno for reassurance. That night, as they walked home under a sky full of stars, Juno felt a profound sense of pride. Roscoe had faced his greatest fear, not just with courage, but with compassion. He had transformed his trauma into understanding, his pain into empathy. "You did it," she whispered, burying her face in his soft fur. "You're not broken, Roscoe. You never were." The following weeks were intense for Juno and Roscoe. The specialized training demanded dedication from both. Harris came 3 times a week, bringing equipment and knowledge to transform the recovered Labrador into a true assistance dog. Juno learned specific commands, handling techniques, and how to identify subtle signals that Roscoe emitted. The Labrador, in turn, expanded his repertoire of skills, retrieving objects, opening doors, offering support for balance, and even responding to simulated emergencies. "He has natural talents," Harris observed, after a particularly successful session. "It's as if he's finally found his calling." News of Roscoe's transformation spread throughout the community, inspiring others to consider adopting rescued dogs. Even Amber Collins, the girl who used to taunt Juno, showed up at the farm one day, timidly asking if she could meet the cool miracle dog everyone was talking about. At home, the date of Juno's parents' return was approaching. The guest room was transformed back into a space for the couple, and Martha spent hours organizing details for a warm reception. "They'll love Roscoe," Chester commented as he adjusted a burned-out lamp on the porch. "And they'll be proud to see how much you've grown, dear." The prospect of reuniting with her parents after so long filled Juno with a mixture of conflicting emotions: joy, anxiety, and even a pang of resentment for the long period of absence. What would it be like to introduce them to the person she had become? Amid these reflections, an unexpected challenge arose. During a training session in the town park, a group of children approached, fascinated by Roscoe. One of them, a boy of about 8, ran excitedly before his parents could contain him. The sudden movement and the child's high energy triggered something in Roscoe. In an instant, the confident and calm Labrador transformed back into the frightened dog from the auction. He backed away, visibly trembling, his hair standing on end, a low growl escaping his throat. "Roscoe, no!" Juno commanded, trying to control the situation. The boy stopped, confused and a little scared. His parents quickly pulled him back, looking disapprovingly at the dog. "I thought this dog was trained," the father commented acidly. Juno felt her face burn with shame and concern. She crouched beside Roscoe, speaking calmly until he calmed down, the trembling gradually diminishing. When the family walked away, Harris, who had been watching from a distance, approached with a serious expression. "That's a problem," he said frankly. "An assistance dog can't react like that, no matter how scared he is." "It was just a setback," Juno argued defensively. "He was progressing so well, and he still is," Harris assured. "But we need to work on this specific trigger. Energetic children clearly take him back to the original trauma." The incident left a mark on Juno. What if Roscoe never completely overcame his past? What if, despite all the progress, he remained fundamentally broken? Harris, noticing her discouragement, placed a hand on her shoulder. "Every service dog faces challenges in training. It doesn't mean Roscoe has failed, just that we've found an obstacle we need to work on." In the following weeks, they dedicated themselves to careful desensitization. Gradually, they exposed Roscoe to children, first at a distance, then closer, always in controlled environments. They used positive reinforcement, patience, and lots of treats. Progress was frustratingly slow. Some days, Roscoe seemed completely comfortable around the volunteer children who helped with the training. Other days, a sudden movement or a high-pitched laugh would trigger his defensive response. "And maybe he's just not cut out for this," Juno confessed to Harris one rainy afternoon after a particularly difficult session. "Maybe I'm pushing him too hard." Harris considered her words thoughtfully before responding. "Service work isn't for every dog, that's true," he admitted. "But I still believe in Roscoe, and more importantly, I believe in your partnership. Together you can overcome this challenge." The ultimate test came unexpectedly. During a community fair where Juno and Roscoe were demonstrating basic assistance skills, a small commotion broke out at a nearby booth. A little girl had gotten separated from her parents and was crying inconsolably, surrounded by strangers trying to help. Roscoe's ears perked up at the sound of the child's cries. Before Juno could react, he was pulling in the girl's direction, his behavior focused and purposeful, not fearful or aggressive. "Roscoe, wait!" Juno called, but the Labrador was determined. To everyone's amazement, Roscoe approached the crying child with gentle, measured movements. Instead of showing fear or nervousness, he lay down beside her, his head resting gently against her small hand. The effect was immediate. The girl's sobs subsided as she looked at the dog with wide, curious eyes. "Look at that," whispered an observer. "It's like he knows exactly what she needs." By the time the girl's frantic parents arrived, she was calmly petting Roscoe, her tears forgotten. The Labrador remained steady, his eyes occasionally seeking Juno for reassurance. That night, as they walked home under a sky full of stars, Juno felt a profound sense of pride. Roscoe had faced his greatest fear, not just with courage, but with compassion. He had transformed his trauma into understanding, his pain into empathy. "You did it," she whispered, burying her face in his soft fur. "You're not broken, Roscoe. You never were." The day of Juno's parents' return dawned clear and bright. The farmhouse had been meticulously cleaned, favorite dishes prepared, and a welcome banner hung across the porch. Juno had spent hours getting ready, nervous energy making her pace back and forth in her room, while Roscoe watched with patient eyes. "What if they don't recognize me?" she asked the Labrador, who tilted his head in response. "I feel like I'm not the same person they left behind." As the sound of an approaching car reached them, Juno felt her heart race. She gripped Roscoe's harness for support, not physical but emotional. The reunion was tearful and joyful. Sarah and Michael Morgan held their daughter tightly, apologizing for the long absence, marveling at how much she had grown. They met Roscoe with curious delight, listening attentively as Juno proudly recounted his story and their journey together. "He's not just a pet," she explained as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "He's a certified therapy dog now. We visit the children's hospital twice a week, and we're starting a program at the retirement home next month." Harris's special program had evolved beyond his original vision. While Roscoe had passed most of his service dog certifications, it had become clear that his true gift lay in emotional support. His innate ability to sense distress and offer comfort made him an ideal therapy dog, a role that allowed him to work with children without triggering his old traumas. "We're so proud of you, Juno," her father said, his voice thick with emotion, "and not just for helping this wonderful dog, but for the person you've become." The weeks that followed were filled with new routines and happy adjustments. Sarah and Michael integrated seamlessly back into farm life, taking genuine interest in Juno and Roscoe's work. They attended their first therapy session at the hospital, watching with pride as their daughter confidently guided Roscoe from room to room, bringing comfort to sick children. One evening, as Juno sat on the porch steps with her mother, watching Roscoe and her father play fetch in the yard, Sarah posed a question that had been on her mind. "What made you choose him? At the auction, I mean. Out of all the animals there, why that broken, scared dog?" Juno considered the question, watching as Roscoe enthusiastically returned a ball to her laughing father. "Because he wasn't broken," she answered finally. "He was just waiting for someone to see past the scars, just like me." Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she pulled her daughter close. "You've taught us something precious, Juno, about healing, about patience, about seeing the value in what others discard." The story of Juno and Roscoe spread beyond their small community. A reporter from a regional newspaper wrote a feature article about them, highlighting how their partnership had inspired a new approach to rehabilitating traumatized animals. Several other discarded service dogs had been rescued and paired with teenagers from challenging backgrounds, creating bonds that healed both human and animal. Willow Creek Farm gradually transformed as well. With Michael and Sarah's support, Juno established a small training area where people could bring rescue dogs for basic obedience lessons. Even Amber Collins eventually brought a timid rescue puppy, awkwardly asking Juno for advice. "I never thought I'd be taking dog training tips from you," she admitted, watching as Juno demonstrated a simple command. "But after seeing what you did with Roscoe, well, I thought maybe I could do something similar." It wasn't a full apology for years of teasing, but it was a beginning. Juno accepted it gracefully, focusing on the nervous puppy rather than past grudges. On the one-year anniversary of Roscoe's auction, Juno organized a celebration at the farm. The event doubled as a fundraiser for the local animal shelter and attracted dozens of community members, including Harris and many of the patients they had met during therapy sessions. Standing before the gathered crowd, with Roscoe sitting proudly beside her, Juno no longer felt the self-consciousness that had once defined her. Her leg still had its permanent weakness, but it no longer seemed to matter, not when she had found such strength in other ways. "A year ago, I thought I was saving a dog," she told the crowd, her hand resting on Roscoe's head. "What I didn't realize was that he was also saving me. Roscoe taught me that our scars don't define us, that patience can heal the deepest wounds, and that sometimes the most broken-looking beings have the most to give." As the sun set over Willow Creek Farm, casting long shadows across the fields, where both Juno and Roscoe had once felt so lost, a profound sense of peace settled over them. The journey wasn't over. There would always be new challenges, new fears to overcome, but they would face them together, two once broken souls who had found wholeness in each other. Later that night, as Roscoe settled on his bed at the foot of Juno's, she whispered the same words she had spoken in the barn many months ago, when a frightened dog had first touched his nose to her hand. "It's okay. You're safe now. We both are." And in the silver moonlight streaming through the window, Juno could have sworn Roscoe smiled. My friends, we've come to the end of the story. Did you like it? What lesson can you bring to life from this story? Leave it here in the comments. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and watch this video that's playing on your screen. This story will impact you. See you next time.